It was a cold winter night. The streets were almost empty, and the wind carried a biting chill that made even the strongest man want to stay indoors. The city lights glowed faintly through the fog, and the only sound was the occasional whistle of the wind rushing through the buildings. A successful CEO was driving home alone that night. His car heater was on, yet he could still feel the coldness in his heart. Success had given him money, a big house, and all the luxuries anyone could dream of. But what he didn't have was someone waiting for him at home. His life looked perfect from the outside, but inside, it was filled with silence and loneliness. As he drove through a quiet street, something caught his attention. At a bus stop, he noticed a young woman sitting on the bench, holding a small baby tightly in her arms. The bus stop shelter was old and broken, offering little protection from the freezing air. The woman was shivering, her face pale, her clothes thin, and the baby wrapped in a small blanket that was clearly not enough for such a harsh night. The sight immediately touched him. For a moment, he thought about driving past. It was late, and he had work waiting for him the next day. But his heart would not allow it. Something deep inside told him he couldn't leave them there in that condition. He slowed his car and pulled over near the bus stop. Rolling down the window, he called out softly, not wanting to frighten her. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" The woman looked up with tired eyes. She didn't answer at first, just held the baby closer. Her body shook from the cold, and it was clear she had been sitting there for a long time. The CEO stepped out of his car, his breath forming small clouds in the freezing air. He approached carefully, keeping his distance so she wouldn't feel threatened. "I saw you sitting here," he said gently. "It's very cold tonight. Is there somewhere you're waiting to go?" The woman's lips trembled as she spoke. Her voice was low, almost breaking. She explained that she was a nurse, finishing her late shift at the hospital. She had hoped to catch the bus home, but she had missed the last one. With no car of her own and no family nearby to call for help, she had no choice but to wait, hoping someone might stop and help. But the night kept growing colder, and no one had. The CEO looked at the baby, whose small face was barely visible beneath the thin blanket. The child was quiet, but his little hands were freezing. The man's heart ached at the sight. He thought about his warm home waiting for him just a few miles away, with extra rooms and plenty of space, yet he had always returned there alone. And now, here in front of him, was a young mother struggling to keep her child safe from the cold. "Please," he said softly, "you can't stay here. It's too cold, and the baby isn't safe. I can take you somewhere warm." The woman hesitated. She was scared. After all, he was a stranger, and trusting a stranger in the middle of the night was risky. But she looked at her baby's small face, pale and fragile in her arms. She knew she couldn't risk the baby's health any longer. Finally, she nodded slowly. The CEO opened the back door of his car and gently offered her space. She carefully stepped inside, holding her baby close. As the warmth of the car heater touched her skin, she let out a shaky breath of relief. The baby stirred a little, but soon settled in the warmth. The man got back into the driver's seat and started the engine. The silence inside the car was heavy at first. Neither of them spoke. He didn't want to push her to talk, and she was still unsure if she had made the right choice. But gradually, the quiet hum of the heater and the calm ride made her feel a little safer. Looking through the rearview mirror, the CEO saw her gently rocking the baby, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. He could see how much she had been struggling, yet she still managed to hold her child with so much love and care. Something about her strength and quiet dignity moved him deeply. As he drove, he thought about his own life. He had everything money could buy, but none of the warmth he was seeing in that simple bond between mother and child. For the first time in many years, he felt that his success meant nothing if he couldn't share it with someone who needed it. After a few minutes, he broke the silence. "You don't have to worry. I only want to help. You and your baby deserve to be warm and safe tonight." The woman gave a small nod. She still didn't say much, but he noticed her shoulders relax slightly, as though she was beginning to trust him. The city lights passed by as they drove through the quiet streets. Neither of them knew then that this night, which began with a lonely man and a shivering mother at a bus stop, was about to change all of their lives forever. The ride continued through the cold night. The nurse sat quietly in the back seat, her baby resting against her chest. The CEO glanced into the mirror again. He could see the tired lines on her face, the heavy weight of exhaustion in her eyes. She looked like someone who had been carrying the world on her shoulders for too long. After a while, he spoke again, this time in a softer voice. "You must be very tired. How long have you been working today?" Her answer came slowly. She explained she had been at the hospital for over 12 hours. It was a long shift, filled with emergencies, patients needing care, and endless rounds. She loved her work, she said, but it was getting harder every day. He asked gently, "Do you always bring your baby with you?" Her voice cracked as she explained her situation. She had lost her husband a year ago in an accident. Since then, she had been raising the baby alone. With no family nearby and no one to lean on, she had no choice but to take the child wherever she went. Most of the time, she left the baby with a neighbor while working, but on that night, the neighbor wasn't available. She had no one else to ask for help. The CEO listened silently. Every word pulled at his heart. He had always admired people in the medical field, but he never imagined the sacrifices someone like her had to make. Her life wasn't easy, yet she was still fighting for her child's future. She looked down at her baby and whispered, "He is all I have." Her arms tightened protectively around the child. For a moment, the car was quiet again. The man felt a lump in his throat. He thought about his own life. He had no wife, no children, no one to share his days with. He had been consumed by work, meetings, contracts, and deadlines. All the things he had thought were important suddenly felt small when compared to the strength of this woman holding her baby with so much love. The CEO broke the silence. "You have been through a lot, but you are stronger than you think. I can see that." Her eyes filled with tears, not because of pity, but because it had been so long since someone had spoken kind words to her. Most days, she felt invisible. At the hospital, she was just another nurse in uniform. At home, she explained further about her struggles. Her salary was small, barely enough to cover rent, food, and baby needs. Sometimes, she skipped meals so her child could eat better. She confessed she had been behind on rent and feared losing her apartment. Every day was a new challenge, but she kept going because she had no other choice. The man gripped the steering wheel tighter. Her story reminded him of the emptiness of his own life. He had money, yet no meaning. She had almost nothing, yet gave everything she had for her child. They reached a red light. The man turned slightly and said, "You shouldn't have to go through this alone. Tonight, please let me help you. At least for a little while, let me make things easier." She looked at him, unsure how to respond. For so long, she had been on her own, depending on no one. Trust didn't come easily, but the sincerity in his eyes made her believe he meant what he said. The baby stirred again, letting out a small cry. She gently rocked him, whispering soothing words until he calmed down. Watching her, the CEO felt a strange warmth inside. It wasn't pity. It was admiration. Finally, she spoke, her voice low but steady. "I didn't want to tell you everything. I don't want sympathy. I just want to be able to raise my child with dignity." The CEO nodded. "I don't see weakness in you. I see courage. And courage deserves support, not pity." Her eyes softened. For the first time that night, she gave a small, genuine smile. It was faint, but it lit up her tired face. The car moved forward again. The city was quiet, the streets almost empty. The CEO thought about where to take her. He decided to bring her to his home, at least for the night. It was the safest and warmest place he could offer immediately. As they approached his large house, she looked out the window in surprise. The building stood tall and elegant, glowing softly under the night sky. She had never been near such a home before. Her first instinct was to refuse. It felt too strange, too different from her world. But when she looked at her baby, still shivering slightly despite the warmth of the car, she knew she had to accept. The CEO parked the car and opened the door for her. She hesitated, then carefully stepped out, holding her child close. He led her inside, where warmth and light immediately surrounded them. The nurse stood quietly in the hallway, unsure of what to say. The CEO simply said, "You don't need to worry. Tonight, you and your baby will be safe here." At that moment, something shifted in her heart. For the first time in months, she felt she wasn't completely alone in the world. And for the CEO, for the first time in years, his house didn't feel so empty anymore. The house was quiet as they stepped inside. Warm air greeted them, and the soft glow of the lights replaced the darkness of a cold night outside. The nurse stood at the doorway, still holding her baby tightly. She looked unsure, almost out of place, as if she had stepped into a world that didn't belong to her. The CEO noticed her hesitation. He smiled gently and said, "Please come in. You don't have to be afraid. You are safe here." She nodded slightly but did not move right away. Her instincts told her to be careful, but her heart told her to trust. She finally walked in, her baby resting against her chest, both of them still shivering from the long hours at the bus stop. He guided her to the living room. The large fireplace was unlit, but he quickly set a fire going, and soon the crackling flames filled the room with warmth. The baby stirred and let out a small sound, as if relieved to finally feel real comfort. The woman gently rubbed the child's back, her face softening as she saw her baby relax. "Please sit," the CEO said, pointing toward a couch. She sat down slowly, still holding the child. For a moment, there was silence, broken only by the sound of the fire. "I'll bring you something warm to eat," he said, heading toward the kitchen. The nurse watched him go, still unsure about everything. She was not used to kindness from strangers. For months, her world had been full of struggles, and every day felt like a battle just to survive. Tonight felt unreal, almost like a dream. The CEO returned after a few minutes, carrying a tray with warm soup, bread, and hot tea. He placed it on the table and gently said, "Eat. You must be hungry." Her eyes filled with tears as she looked at the food. It had been a long day at the hospital, and she had skipped her own meals to make sure her baby was fed. Slowly, she put the baby down beside her, making sure he was wrapped safely in the blanket, and picked up the bowl of soup. Each spoonful warmed her tired body, and she felt her strength returning little by little. The CEO watched quietly. He didn't want to make her uncomfortable with too many questions, but he wanted her to know she was welcome. After a while, he asked softly, "Do you want me to prepare a room for you and the baby? You should rest." She hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you." He led her upstairs to a guest room. It was simple but warm, with a soft bed, fresh sheets, and extra blankets. She stood in the doorway, almost unable to believe this kindness. The man gently said, "This is yours for tonight. You can rest here. If you need anything, the room across the hall is mine." She laid her baby on the bed, carefully tucking him in. The child stretched his little arms and gave a tiny yawn before closing his eyes. She watched him with relief, knowing that at least tonight, he would not suffer in the cold. Turning back to the CEO, she said quietly, "I don't know how to thank you. You didn't have to do this." He shook his head. "Sometimes life puts people in our path for a reason. Maybe tonight I was meant to see you." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she said nothing more. Instead, she sat by her child, gently stroking his small hand as he slept. The CEO returned downstairs. He sat by the fire, staring at the flames. His house had always been large and beautiful, but it had never felt alive. Tonight was different. Tonight, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of purpose beyond his work and wealth. As he sat there, he thought about the loneliness he carried. Money had built him walls, but those walls had kept out not just pain, but also love and connection. Seeing that woman care for her baby with so little yet give so much love made him realize what he had been missing all along. Upstairs, the nurse struggled to sleep at first. Her body was tired, but her mind was restless. She thought about the stranger who had opened his home to her without asking for anything in return. She thought about how rare such kindness was in her life. For months, she had fought her battles silently, never asking for help. Tonight, for the first time, she felt like someone had noticed her struggle. Finally, with her baby sleeping peacefully beside her and the warmth of the blankets covering her, she closed her eyes. A deep, much-needed rest came over her. Downstairs, the CEO stayed awake for a long time, thinking. He wondered what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know how long she would stay, or how much he could help her. But he knew one thing for sure. He could not turn away now. Something had begun tonight. Something that felt bigger than either of them could understand. As the fire slowly burned down, he whispered to himself, "This is not the end of our story. It's only the beginning." The morning sunlight poured gently through the curtains. The nurse opened her eyes slowly, confused for a moment about where she was. Then she saw her baby sleeping peacefully beside her, wrapped warmly in blankets. Relief washed over her. For the first time in many nights, she hadn't woken up worried about the cold or the next day's struggles. She quietly sat up and looked around the room. It was neat, comfortable, and far from anything she was used to. For a second, she wondered if she had made a mistake accepting help from a stranger. But then she saw her baby's calm face, safe and warm, and her heart settled. Downstairs, the CEO was already awake. He had prepared breakfast, nothing fancy, just eggs, toast, and milk, but it was done with care. He heard footsteps on the stairs and looked up as the nurse entered the room, holding her baby in her arms. She looked shy, almost hesitant, as if she wasn't sure she belonged there. "Good morning," he said with a gentle smile. "Did you sleep well?" She nodded softly. "Better than I have in months." "Thank you." He gestured to the table. "Please sit. You must be hungry." She placed the baby in a chair beside her, making sure he was safe, then sat down. The smell of warm food made her stomach growl quietly, and she lowered her eyes in embarrassment. He pretended not to notice, and simply poured her a glass of milk. As they ate, their conversation grew a little easier. She told him more about her life, how she had studied to become a nurse, how she worked long shifts, and how losing her husband had left her with no support. Every word revealed the strength it took for her to keep going, even when the world seemed against her. The CEO listened closely. He didn't interrupt, only asked gentle questions when she paused. He wanted to understand her, not just her struggles, but her courage too. After breakfast, she offered to help clean up, but he shook his head. "You don't need to do that. You've had enough burdens. Just focus on resting for now." Her eyes softened. She wasn't used to anyone caring for her. Most of her days were spent giving time, energy, and compassion to patients at the hospital, and giving all her love to her child. Rarely did anyone give back to her. Over the next few days, a quiet rhythm began to form. The nurse stayed at his home temporarily while she figured out what to do next. She helped around the house where she could, cooking small meals or folding laundry, while he continued his work from home. The baby brought warmth to the house, filling it with laughter and little sounds that the CEO had never experienced before. One afternoon, he watched as the nurse played with her child in the living room. The baby's tiny giggles filled the space, and for the first time, the large house didn't feel empty. It felt alive. The sight touched him deeply. He realized how much joy could be found in the simplest things, something his money and business, success had never given him. Later that evening, while they sat by the fire, the CEO said quietly, "You know, this house has been silent for a long time. Having you here has changed that." The nurse looked at him, unsure how to respond. She could see sincerity in his eyes. She lowered her gaze, her voice soft. "I don't want to be a burden. You've already done so much." "You're not a burden," he replied firmly. "If anything, you've reminded me of something I had forgotten, what it means to really live, not just exist." Her heart swelled at his words. She had spent so long being invisible, fighting battles no one noticed. To be seen, to be valued, even in this small way, was more than she had expected. The trust between them grew slowly, like the first signs of spring after a harsh winter. She began to feel safe opening up to him, telling him about her fears of losing her home, her struggles with balancing work and childcare, and the constant worry that her child would suffer because of her financial situation. Each time she spoke, he listened with patience. He never judged, never made her feel small. Instead, he reminded her of her strength, encouraging her to see the courage it took to carry on. And in return, she noticed the loneliness in him too. Beneath his calm and composed exterior, she could see a man who had spent years building walls around his heart. He had wealth, but no one to share it with. She could sense the quiet sadness he carried, and she realized that in some way they both needed each other. One evening, as the baby slept peacefully upstairs, the CEO said softly, "Life has a strange way of bringing people together. If I hadn't driven down that street that night, I would have missed meeting you. And that thought, it feels unthinkable now." The nurse looked at him, her eyes shining with emotion. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled softly, and the silence between them was filled not with awkwardness, but with understanding. That night, when she returned to her room and looked at her baby sleeping soundly, she whispered, "Maybe we are not as alone as I thought." And downstairs, the CEO sat by the fire, feeling something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of belonging, not because of what he owned, but because of who was now sharing his home. Days turned into weeks, and what began as a single act of kindness slowly became a bond none of them had expected. The CEO's once silent home now carried the sound of footsteps, soft laughter, and the gentle cooing of a baby. Every morning, the smell of warm food filled the kitchen. Every evening, the glow of the fireplace brought them together like a small family. The nurse had grown more comfortable, though she never forgot that this was his house, not hers. She often worried about overstaying her welcome, but each time she tried to speak about leaving, the CEO reassured her. "You and your baby are safe here. Stay until you're ready. Don't rush." Her heart softened more each day. She realized he wasn't helping out of pity. He truly cared. He saw her not as a burden, but as someone who deserved a chance to breathe again after carrying too much for too long. The baby, too, began to flourish. His cheeks grew rounder, his laughter more frequent. The warmth of the house, the regular meals, and the security of a stable environment gave him a light that had been missing. Watching her child safe and happy brought tears to the nurse's eyes many times. One afternoon, the CEO came home earlier than usual. He found the nurse sitting in the living room, carefully mending a small piece of baby clothing with needle and thread. She looked up a little startled, but smiled faintly. "You didn't have to do that," he said gently. She lowered her eyes. "I'm used to fixing things, making them last. It's what I can do." He sat across from her. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded the small piece of clothing. No one had ever said that to her before. She had always been expected to endure, to keep pushing, no matter how tired she became. Hearing those words broke something open inside her, and she couldn't hold back the tears. The CEO leaned forward, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I was alone for so many years. I thought success was about money, power, and status. But none of it mattered. The house was empty. My heart was empty. Meeting you and your child, it has reminded me what really matters." The nurse wiped her tears quickly, not wanting to appear weak. But in that moment, she didn't feel weak. She felt seen. She felt human again. Over the next few weeks, the bond between them deepened. They spoke more openly, shared more of their pasts. She told him about her struggles after her husband's passing, the nights she stayed awake worrying about bills, the exhaustion of working double shifts with no one to help her. He told her about his long years of loneliness, how he had buried himself in work to avoid facing the emptiness in his life. Slowly, trust grew into something stronger, something unspoken but real. It wasn't about romance or sudden promises. It was about understanding, compassion, and two broken lives finding healing in each other's company. One evening, as the baby slept upstairs, they sat by the fire once again. The nurse looked at him quietly and said, "If you hadn't stopped that night, I don't know what would have happened to us." He looked at her, his eyes steady. Maybe I was meant to. Maybe we both were meant to find each other. The silence that followed was warm, not empty. It was the silence of two people who no longer needed to fill the air with words because their hearts had begun to understand each other. As days passed, the nurse slowly rebuilt her strength. She found herself smiling more often, laughing with her baby, and even planning for the future again. The CEO, on the other hand, discovered the joy of small, ordinary moments. The baby grabbing his finger, the nurse humming softly as she cooked, the simple comfort of sharing meals with someone instead of eating alone. The house that once echoed with silence now carried the sounds of life. One night, after putting the baby to sleep, the nurse stood by the window, looking out at the stars. The CEO joined her quietly. She turned to him and said, "I still don't know where life will take me. But I do know this, you've given us more than shelter. You've given us hope." He looked at her, his voice calm but full of meaning. "And you've given me something I never thought I'd find. A reason to come home." At that moment, they both knew that their lives had changed forever. The lonely man was no longer lonely, and the struggling mother no longer felt she had to fight alone. Their paths had crossed at a bus stop on a freezing night. But what grew from that encounter was something deeper than either of them had expected. It was the start of a new beginning, a chance for healing, for love, and for building a life together. And as the baby slept,